right. Well, to respect everybody's time, I think we should go ahead and get things started. Thank you for joining us this evening to talk a little bit about fertigation in the high tunnel. We are very fortunate to have our friend and professional partner, Dr. Rachel Rudolph from University of Kentucky. She's an extension vegetable specialist, predominantly working with market and commercial growers, and is based in Lexington, but has to travel all over the state to serve the farmers in Kentucky. So we really appreciate to have Rachel's expertise on the call tonight. And I will turn it over to Rachel and we can get things rolling.
Great, thank you. Happy to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share. Okay. So yeah, I'm happy to collaborate here with Grow Appalachia tonight. We've built a couple of high tunnels together at the UK Horticulture Research Farm, and that was a really fun time that the county agents who participated with us still talk about it. So it was a good I don't know, 6 days, I think it was all in total. But so as part of working in a high tunnel, right, you've got to fertilize the soil and irrigate the soil some way, somehow. And because it's a covered structure, protected agriculture, you're the one managing it. It's Mother Nature's not doing it for you. So we'll jump in. Fertigation is a big component of vegetable production in general, and especially high tunnel production. Before we get into fertigation, though, I do want to make sure that everyone's kind of up to speed when we use terms like soil fertility and just some general things. So when we talk about soil fertility, we're talking about the capacity of the soil to receive, store, and pass on energy, nutrients to support plant growth. So we're talking about it basically from a human perspective of the ability of the soil to support crop production. It refers to overall nutrient status of the soil and the ability of the soil to provide nutrients to the plants. And so for the purpose of tonight, right, there's a lot of people out there that are growing in soilless media and bags. But for the purpose of tonight, we'll talk about real soil, growing in real soil with a high tunnel or, even small plots. This pretty much all the same information still applies for this. And so components of soil fertility include chemical, nutrients, and soil pH, biological, which would be the microorganisms, even pests and diseases, right? And then the physical, which is the mineral in the parent rock, and the physical properties of the soil like compaction and aggregation and aggregate stability, things like that. That's physical. And that is all, they're all linked and they all play into one another. For the purpose of tonight, we're going to be focusing primarily on the chemical component. And so just to make sure that we're all on the same page, crop nutritional requirements are the same regardless of whether you're an organic or conventional producer. The source of the nutrients is what changes depending on the production system, but from the plant's perspective, it's not that different, right? And so they still need macronutrients and micronutrients regardless of the source, right? And so the macronutrients are the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, right? That NPK we all talk about. Calcium and magnesium and sulfur are also considered macronutrients. And then the micronutrients are not less important. They're just required in smaller quantities. So whereas your soil report that you get back may say pounds per acre for the macronutrients, micronutrients might be parts per million, right? Still important, still valuable, but just a lot smaller quantity. And so you can see that list there of micronutrients. And so the plant uptake of nutrients the source of the nutrients is what changes depending on the production system, not the quantity needed or the quality of it, right? And so plants are only capable of absorbing nutrients in certain forms, regardless of the source. Again, so if we've got organic producers on the webinar tonight or conventional producers, all this information should still very much apply to you, and hopefully you find it useful. And plants don't distinguish, right, or differentiate between these different sources of fertilizer. They do need certain forms of nutrients to take up and utilize, right? And so for nitrogen, that's nitrate, right, NO3, and ammonia, right, NH4 plus, right, and then potassium is K plus, right? That's the kind of form it needs to be in to be taken up. And so I say this almost at every talk, even when we're not even talking about soil, just because I think it's so important. So please, if you haven't already sampled your soil, I encourage you to get to know your soil, to sample it. If you're just putting in a high tunnel, highly encourage you to go ahead and sample the soil. And for vegetable producers, I recommend that you sample your soil at least once a year, and that would be preferably in the fall, at the end of, tomato growing season, for example. So October, before the soil gets really cool and it's still easy to work, right? If you can sample in October and go ahead and submit that sample and get things prepped and ready, that's ideal. It doesn't always work out that way. For me as well, life happens, but that's ideal. And so for UK, right, this is a routine soil test, and it depends on the county, but it's usually about $7. You can also go through Waters Agricultural Labs in Owensboro. That's also a relatively local lab, right? And if you're in a high tunnel or if you've been in a high tunnel for a couple of years, I highly recommend that you start requesting a soluble salts test for your high tunnel, because that we want to monitor that as time goes on. And even with fertigation, that if and we'll go into it a little bit today, but it's not quite on the docket. Because fertigation just puts nutrients right near the root zone, right on top of the soil. Sometimes that fertilizer can hang out there and cause issues as time goes on. So the big thing is learning how to interpret the results of a soil test and learning what it means, and that the idea behind testing every year is that you only apply the nutrients you need based on the soil and the soil test and the crop you intend to grow, right? And so that's where fertigation can really be helpful, is it helps you only apply small doses as needed, and the crop can take it up gradually versus just one large burst of fertilizer, for example. And in the end, it should help you save money, conserve, be more sustainable, be more environmentally sound, and hopefully prevent plant developmental issues and abiotic disorders. And so real quick, just in a high tunnel, for example, treat a high tunnel like you would a field that you sample, right? Collect random samples throughout that high tunnel. You could usually collect in like a W kind of shape, just to make sure you get all parts of the high tunnel. And you want to collect about 8 inches deep, because that's about what the most vegetable roots are growing, about that deep, not much deeper. And you want to combine all of that into a bucket, mix it really well, break it up, make sure it's not too wet, and then take about 1 or 2 cups of soil and put it in a bag for the lab. So the lab, if you submit a gallon of soil, the lab is only going to use like a cup. So you can submit, 5 gallons of soil, but they're still only going to use 1 cup. So you might as well just kind of save your shipping and your effort, and just take a really good sample and then take a subsample from that and submit that. And so this is just an example of a UK soil test. And so for most soil reports, it's really important that the grower provide information for what they intend to grow. And so if you're going to grow several different things in your high tunnel, then maybe you should collect a couple of different samples, and so that you'll get different recommendations for those different crops, especially if they're things that are distinctly different, such as tomatoes versus lettuce, right? The recommendations for that are going to be different. And so just keep that in mind. You can also talk to the Grow app folks or your county agent to kind of discuss the results and how you could parse that out. The one thing I will say is if you, for UK, and I'm not sure if Waters does this, if you put tomatoes in, they will provide a Hart's ratio. And the Hart's ratio is really crucial. It's very helpful in kind of anticipating some potential abiotic disorders that may be on your horizon. So it is potassium to magnesium ratio. So you can kind of make a little bit of sense of that here. And basically for our soil, the Hart's ratio that is given at UK is based off of the UK type soil. And so, or Kentucky type soil, excuse me. So if the ratio is less than 0.35, you can see this, there is a greater chance that tomatoes will have ripening disorders such as yellow shoulder or blotchy ripening. And so basically what that comes down to is if your potassium is quite a bit lower than your magnesium, then you may be, you can almost count on having some yellow shoulder issues. And so that's just kind of to help people prepare and potentially apply more potassium. And to truth be told, I cannot explain, I've discussed this with other people, I'm not quite sure what happens, but it also happens in my high tunnels. The potassium does decline over time in high tunnels and the magnesium creeps up. And so it is almost, from what I have seen, it's almost inevitable that this is going to happen. And I'm sure it has something to do with basically we're operating in an irrigated desert, right? So we've got this protected system, there's no rain, and we're dosing things out. And it's lovely until, over time, some complications can arise. And I can't, others cannot quite explain this to me, and I can't explain it, but it does seem to be a lot. And so for new high tunnel operators, just, it's important to keep testing and sampling your soil and keeping that in mind in order to pay attention to that. And so just some general recommendations and things to keep in mind, right? Guidelines for tomato and pepper crops, for example. I'm going to give you just some of the big important vegetables that a lot of people are probably either already have in their tunnel or planning on having in their tunnel, right? Phosphorus, the recommendation is 31 to 60 pounds per acre of phosphorus. Potassium, 200 to 300 pounds per acre of potassium, and magnesium is right around 200. And so I'll switch back to that test real quick so you can see, right? Potassium's pretty much right on target. They are recommending a little bit more potash. If you broke this down into pounds per square foot, right, this would be nothing. And we'll go into that a little bit, actually. We're actually a lot of it. And right, you can see the soil pH is a little off, and the magnesium, I would say, is perfect, really. And so 200, I would say that's max 200. And so soil pH for tomato solanaceous crops generally 6.5 to 6.8. And something to keep in mind is to raise the pH, which that test indicated that person should, right? You need to apply lime. And in order for that to take full effect, that's about 6 months of, so that's why it would be optimal for someone to sample in October get that test back right away, and then go ahead and apply that lime, because come March, you're good to go, right? That if you apply the right amount of lime, you should be on target. If you sample in March and plant in March, you should still apply the lime. I would not say don't bother, but it will not immediately bring your pH up. It is a long-term process, and you should continue to monitor your pH over time if you struggle with low pH. The same thing goes for lowering your pH. Applying sulfur can take up to a year. It is a process of converting that sulfur to sulfuric acid, which is a microbial process, and they are not operating on our timeline, right? They're on their own. So just keep that in mind. Recommendations for nitrogen. So typically we'd say apply 50 pounds per acre of nitrogen before planting, prior to transplanting in the ground, and then 30 to 50 pounds per acre of nitrogen post planting. At fruit set, you can do a side dress, or the big thing we're gonna talk about tonight is splitting it up into weekly applications via fertigation. And so the soil nitrogen is not a part of the regular UK soil test, because nitrogen is very mobile. If you sample in October for nitrogen, it is not going to be the same thing by the time you plant. And so we operate kind of on an assumption of this is what you're going to need. This is most likely what you're going to need to put down, based off history and based off of crop needs, that kind of thing. So for organic growers, front loading a lot of your fertility may be necessary just because a lot of the fertilizers available for certified organic fertilizers, OMRI certified fertilizers, are not water soluble, and they are also often in forms that are slow release. So they're not going to be immediately available. That nitrogen's not going to be immediately available to the crop. So you put it down, it goes through its microbial process, its mineralization, and then it's slowly available to the crop. Adding organic matter is a great option, but it is not the best source of nitrogen. It has a lot of phosphorus, it has a lot of potassium. It may also have a lot of salts. And so just understand that if you're adding organic matter, that you should know, one, where it's coming from, and maybe go ahead and do a little an assay or a test, right, and seed some things in it and make sure it's okay and you like the results. And then you can also test your compost or your manure. I believe Waters tests it, and UK also does. So if you want to actually know the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium in that compost, you can certainly do that, and I would highly recommend it. So here's just an example, right? This is great fertilizer. We use this for a lot of our pre-plant stuff. It is not water soluble, but it is a really nice fertilizer. It doesn't have phosphorus, which is what I appreciate about it, because we have plenty of phosphorus in our soil in central Kentucky. And so I don't want to put more down. I don't need it, right? We're operating in the hundreds of pounds per acre already. I don't need to add more, right? And so that goes back to, I shouldn't be paying for something that I don't need, right? So I don't need phosphorus. We've already got it. It's free. It's already in the soil. Let's just go from there. But you can see this total nitrogen, right? 9% water insoluble nitrogen. So the big portion of this nitrogen available is going to be a slow release nitrogen. And so just keep that in mind. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just not going to be an immediate impact on a crop. So for leafy vegetables, very similar phosphorus and potassium and magnesium recommendations. The pH is you have a little bit more leeway on pH, soil pH with leafy greens. And then again, recommendations for nitrogen. I would say the caveat to this is if you are doing cut and come again lettuce, I would agree with this recommendation here, this applying 30 to 50 pounds per acre of nitrogen. if you are doing head lettuce, such as in this photo, I myself do not feel that that is necessary. That amount of nitrogen is necessary. It's a pretty quick crop. These butterhead lettuce, for example, they're ready in 30, 45 days. There is no reason to apply that much nitrogen to a crop that's going to come out of the ground that quickly. And we have had great success. I would say more like 25 pounds per acre nitrogen, maybe split up twice, and we're good to go. But if you're going to be harvesting kale or lettuce or something like that over the course of, many weeks, over the course of a long season, then yes, keep it happy, keep it healthy, and fertigate, and we'll go into that. Some cole crops, again, very similar. They are a little bit more stubborn with their pH, and so they like it just in the happy zone, 6.5, and we're talking broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, those kind of things. The P and the K are pretty much the same. A couple more things to keep in mind, though, are sulfur and boron. Those are especially important for cole crops to avoid hollow core. We don't want that. I don't think I have my photo up here of that, but I've seen that around, and it makes it completely unmarketable in some cases. And so you can do recommendations, right? This 50 pounds per acre pre-plant, and then 30 to 50 pounds per acre when heads begin to form, and 50 pounds per acre 2 weeks later after head formation. Or you could do that pre-plant application and then 10 to 15 pounds per acre of nitrogen weekly when heads begin to form, up to 100 pounds per acre of nitrogen. And so I will say that when I'm saying nitrogen, I mean actual nitrogen. And so we'll go into, okay, well, what if I'm using calcium nitrate? What does that mean? How much nitrogen am I actually applying? That's an important thing to know and understand. And so the reason I'm kind of setting us up, I promise I'm building to something here, is it's really important to understand your soil and what you need to apply and when you need to apply it, to avoid all these, fascinating issues that make your crop produce less, be unmarketable, right? Even possibly death, right? We want to avoid all these complications. So magnesium deficiency, this white core, could be from excessive nitrogen, not enough potassium. And then the manganese toxicity in cole crops. You get this curling of the leaves. You also get these black specks. Once you see it once, you won't forget it, I promise. It's just one of those things, and they're very sensitive as transplants, younger plants. They can be especially sensitive to that. So nutrient deficiencies are, right, a lot of people know the deficient nitrogen, right? That yellowing of the entire plant. A lot of people are familiar with that. Also less vegetative growth, which could lead to sun scald on fruit because they just don't have as much shade. Deficient phosphorus, right? This purpling of the leaves. So one thing I will say is that maybe some of you saw some purpling of leaves back in April or March. And that does not necessarily mean that you needed to apply more phosphorus. When the soil temperatures are cold, the roots just simply can't take up that phosphorus. So if you saw that early on in the spring, I would not say rush out and get, phosphorus. You're probably fine as long as you followed your soil test report. I see that a lot especially in my cole crops in the spring when things are still cold and their roots are still acclimating to cooler soil temperatures. Deficient K, yellowing of the leaf margins, usually in the older leaves. So on the edges of those leaves, you'll get some yellowing. Uneven tomato ripening, that's that yellow shoulder. Interveinal chlorosis is a great sign of deficient magnesium on those lower leaves. That was you see this every year. but also excessive nutrients are a problem. And I think that's something that maybe a lot of people struggle with. Is a lot of people are concerned with deficiencies, but you can also swing too far the other way, and excessive nitrogen can cause, too much vegetative growth, and that can be too little fruit production, right? You've got a lot of plant, but not a lot of fruit, right? You can't sell a bushy tomato plant, you want the fruit. So that can also happen with squash and other cucurbits. Small root production, carrots and beets, right? Disease or insect pest issues when you've got a lot of foliage and there's not a lot of ventilation and then there's a lot of humidity. That's where you get those disease and pest issues. Poor fruit quality, so white cores on tomatoes, blossom drop. That starts happening as temperatures get higher too in the high tunnels. Excessive phosphorus can cause an increase in chlorosis in plants and can also reduce the plant's ability to take up other nutrients. So although I've never seen a plant be, at toxic, quote unquote, levels for phosphorus, it can complicate things for other nutrients, which can then kind of snowball. Excessive salts would show up as like burning on the leaf margins, those edges around the leaves, and generally lower yield. And sometimes this can really creep up on people over the years if you're not monitoring those soluble salts in your soil. And then excessive magnesium, can cause this uneven ripening like we've got here, and that reduced uptake of potassium. So even though you've got a lot of potassium in your soil, it's kind of battling it out, so to speak, with magnesium, and often the magnesium wins when it comes right down to it. So here's some examples of nitrogen fertilizers. So for vegetable growers, conventional vegetable growers, the big two are potassium nitrate and calcium nitrate. And you can see 13% nitrogen, 44% potash, right? That's a great source of potassium and also a pretty good source of nitrogen. It's water soluble. Over time, the soil pH can creep up on you. So again, it's important to keep monitoring things. Calcium nitrate, 15.5 nitrogen and 21% calcium. In Kentucky soils, especially in central Kentucky, we are not deficient in calcium. That is just, our soils just naturally have it. And so it's not usually a concern from my standpoint of people not getting enough calcium. But again, it can raise soil pH over time, but the bonus is that it is water soluble. Urea, 45% nitrogen, also water soluble. This can lower the soil pH over time. So just again, monitoring is all you've got to do. Ammonium nitrate, 33.5% nitrogen. So basically what this means, right, is you can put less fertilizer down to hit that same amount of required nitrogen, right? So when we say 50 pounds per acre of nitrogen, you're going to put less product of something like urea down compared to potassium nitrate to hit that same requirement. Bone meal, a lot of bone meal, feather meal are organic approved. You'd have to check those particular products and make sure you double check for that. But they typically have higher phosphorus and lower nitrogen. Most of these things are not water soluble. So this would be a great pre-plant option or a side dress option. Sodium nitrate, 16% nitrogen. That is water soluble. I think those restrictions have been removed, right, Chris? We were talking about that the other day. He's giving me the thumbs up. So there used to be some restrictions with how much you could use and that kind of thing. And I think that's recently been removed. So that's a great water soluble OMRI approved option. And then here's some other things. Magnesium sulfate, that's what commonly referred to as Epsom salt, 10% magnesium, 13% sulfur. Gypsum, 22% calcium, 18% sulfur, and then we've got the lime, the elemental sulfur, fish emulsion. That's maybe the only other, it's not quite water soluble, but you can mix it with a lot of water, dilute it, and get it through your drip lines as an organic grower. This and sodium nitrate are probably your only two options to fertigate with. But not all fish emulsion is OMRI certified. So triple check that label, triple check the product you're using to make sure that it is approved. The other thing is it can clog emitters. So make sure you've diluted it really well and mixed it really well to make sure that you don't have problems later on. And then of course, manure and compost, I highly recommend you test for those. And their contents vary widely. You can usually get a pretty good estimate if you know the general contents, but I still recommend testing. And so just a quick thing about organic fertilizers. When I'm talking about them, they are carbon-based and derived from living organisms, such as fish emulsion or blood meal. And so compared to inorganic fertilizers that do not contain carbon and are usually manufactured, right? And so that's what I'm referring to when I'm saying organic or synthetic, right? Organic or conventional. Often the synthetic fertilizers are more commonly water soluble, and there's fewer options for water solubility with organic fertilizers. Typically, they're going to be more slow release, and just because not all fertilizers that claim to be organic are OMRI certified or approved, and so this is a great website. You can search for your specific product, look it up, and see if there are any restrictions or what the ruling is on it, and what's up to date. They keep it very up to date, and so it's a very handy website. The benefits of organic fertilizer is that slow release option, minimal loss to the environment because they're less soluble. They add organic matter, which can overall contributes to soil health and increasing water holding capacity. They stimulate microbial activity and improve soil structure, and they can provide valuable micronutrients to plants. The challenges would be they're not immediately available to plants compared to a soluble synthetic fertilizer. They usually have a lower NPK grade, which requires more product to get you to that requirement, 50 pounds per acre, for example. And often the nutrients levels are more equal, like a 1-1-1 or a 4-5-6 or something like that. And so you may be applying more of one nutrient than you really need inadvertently, right? And so usually it's the phosphorus that gets added inadvertently more than it really needs to be. And there is usually a cost factor to organic fertilizers, especially certified organic fertilizers. They typically are more expensive. So we're going to jump right in here. This will play into the fertigation calculations, but I want to make sure everybody's up to speed on this. So the formula listed on a fertilizer bag gives the percent by weight of the major nutrients in the bag, right? 12. So we've got a 12-0-0 on this in this photo, the feather meal. So 12% of the bag is nitrogen, 0% is phosphorus, and 0% is potash. So just out of curiosity, right? If you have a 50-pound bag, you can multiply that by the percent, and that means 6% of that bag is pure nitrogen, right? So let's say you've got a 30 by 96 foot high tunnel. That's 2,800 roughly square feet, which equals about 0.07 acres. And how I've calculated that is I divided this square footage by the number of square feet in an acre, which at this point in my life, I have that number memorized because I use it almost every single day. Chris is shaking his head. Yes, he knows. So 43,560 square feet. So that's how I got that. 228.80 divided by 43,560 gives you this number. So for tomato crop, we talked about it needs 50 pounds of actual nitrogen applied pre-plant. Let's say you want to use this feather meal, that's 1200. You would divide the desired rate by the percent in the bag. So you've got your rate, which is either given to you on the soil test recommendations, or Chris or Mark or Kayla or Story say something to you about it, or I do, or your county agent, somebody, right? You've come up with this recommended rate somewhere. And then you divide that by your percent of what your bag has, right? So you just, it's a percent. So you carry that decimal two spots to the left, and you get 416 pounds per acre of feather meal. So before you freak out, right, remember that you do not have anywhere close to 1 acre here. So then you're going to multiply this number by your actual acreage. And then you end up with a much more reasonable number of 27.5 pounds per acre of feather meal for your entire tunnel. So that is considering the entire inside of your tunnel, and that you're going to broadcast apply that to the entire surface, right? That entire rectangle. So that would be a pre-plant application. You spread it out evenly and you till it in lightly, let's say, right? So that's I won't go over this. That's a 1/4 acre, similar idea. I used a manure test here. And then, but the important thing from this is manure is a complete fertilizer, right? And so you've got also phosphorus and potassium are being applied along with your nitrogen, your desired rate of nitrogen. So at the same time, you are also applying a lot of phosphorus and a lot of potassium. And you've got to ask yourself, did my soil actually need that? And so keep that in mind when you're shopping for fertilizers, and you know, look at your soil tests, look at your fertilizer options, and keep that in mind of what you actually need. So with fertigation, right, we're talking about irrigation plus fertilization. That is basically when we say fertigation. It's a method of applying fertilizer directly to a crop through irrigation water. So we're typically referring to drip irrigation. In vegetable production, I certainly hope we are talking about drip irrigation. That is overall by far the recommended way to irrigate for vegetable crops. You do need a water-soluble fertilizer, and that means it needs to be able to dissolve in water. So if you mix it, you dump in this product, you mix it with water, it should basically disappear, right? The water may be more cloudy, but you should not have large chunks floating around, right? So that's what you're looking for. It's going to look, in the case of, calcium nitrate, it might look somewhat like Alka-Seltzer, floating around in your water. So benefits of fertigation would be that it's like a weekly side dress application. So when we say side dress, normally we mean like maybe once or twice, and you are applying a solid product next to your crop alongside it. But this is a weekly low dose of fertilizer directly at your crop roots. So the beauty of this is you can fertilize under weed mat, landscape fabric, plastic mulch, right? This actually, I love this. This is actually billboard paper, I guess. Like this person got billboard paper, and I just think that's like the most creative thing I've ever seen. But there is drip tape under here, and they were fertigating under here, right? And so you can manage your weeds at the same time that you fertilize your crop. So you're applying that fertilizer right near your crop roots where it can be taken up quickly. And you can make small adjustments if deficiencies are noticed throughout the season, right? You can increase or decrease as needed. You're also not applying a lot of fertilizer to a non-cropped space or location. And so broadcast fertilization means you're covering that whole area, and some may or may not have a crop actually located in that square foot, right? And so sometimes you end up fertilizing weeds inadvertently. And so something to keep in mind, that's the beauty of fertigation. The challenges of fertigation are that not everything can be applied through the drip lines, right? You've got to have a water soluble fertilizer. Soil pH cannot be adjusted via drip irrigation or fertigation. You need to do that beforehand. The soil pH, again, takes 6 to 12 months to be adjusted. P and K should be applied pre-plant. So although there are complete fertilizers that are water soluble, it is much better to apply these particular nutrients before putting the crop in the ground. You also need the right amount of pressure, which I believe will be discussed later, the pressure for an irrigation system. So there are some, challenges to getting that just right. Certainly if you're on a low flow or a, rain-fed system, that you may have some challenges there. Uniform application of fertilizer also depends on the uniformity of your irrigation system and making sure that you have a level surface, right? So if your high tunnel is sloped, and I have seen this before, if the ground inside your high tunnel is sloped, or if your high tunnel is on a hill and it was not leveled, the water and the fertilizer are going to flow downhill, and you will see a difference in the crop growth. Everything at the bottom will be nice and green and lush, and stuff at the top of the hill will be less so. And so keep that in mind. There is, although drip irrigation is pretty consistent, there is still some gravity to be taken into effect, right? And so just keep that in mind. So when and how to use fertigation, weekly maintenance of plant nutrition and fertility. So this would be once a week. So for example, I usually fertigate on Mondays. I get it out of the way and I don't have to think about it for the rest of the week. And I just kind of have that in my brain, and that I would recommend that for people is choose a day that works for you, that usually, you can focus on checking that off your list. And so it's small doses, usually of primarily nitrogen over a long period of time to help avoid sudden vegetative growth that could lead to pest and disease issues. So it's not, I'm going to fertigate all 50 pounds of nitrogen right now, right? It's, I'm going to fertigate this week's portion of that nitrogen, which ends up being a couple of pounds of calcium nitrate, for example. And then I'm going to do it next week. And then I'm going to do it the next week, right? And so it is a maintenance program for your crop to maintain it throughout the season and carry it throughout the season. And so it is ideal for longer term multiple harvest crops that require nutrition throughout the season. Fruiting crops such as tomato and cucumbers, right? We have got multiple harvests. We're harvesting them for months, right? That cut and come again lettuce, again, we're harvesting from them for months. We've got to replenish what we take away. And so that is a really valuable thing to continually give them a small dose of nutrition. And kale, for example, that's another one. We're constantly harvesting from it, taking away from it. We've got to replenish. A single harvest crop may not need it nearly as much as some of these multiple harvest long-term crops. And so if you're kind of deciding, you're on the fence of whether or not this is something you need to invest in, right, or something you need to focus your energy on, maybe that will help. So here's some calculations. So post-plant fertilizer application. For a tomato crop, a total of 50 pounds per acre of nitrogen is recommended throughout the season. So you did 50 pounds pre-plant, and then you're going to do about 50 pounds or 75 pounds, depending on your situation, throughout the season. It's usually applied, how I do it is usually applied once a week, and that's how it's calculated in the UK ID 36. For those of you who are not familiar with this, I'll put a link in the chat. And so that gives recommendations for weekly doses. It is calculated out on an acreage basis. So I myself have to do calculations to get it down to my high tunnel. So let's say we're going to use calcium nitrate. We've got a 30 by 96 high tunnel, but we're not going to fertigate all 2,880 square feet. We're actually going to only fertigate, let's say I have 6 beds and they're about 2 feet wide and they're 85 feet long, right? So I don't have the bed stretching all 96 feet of my high tunnel. I have to get in there and walk a little bit and store some tools in there. So let's say about 85 feet of it are actually, of the length is being used. So that equals, 2 times 85 times 6 is where I got this number, 1,020 square feet. That is what we're actually going to fertigate. And so you calculate that, right? 1,020 divided by the square footage in an acre, and you get this very small number here. So the recommendation per ID 36 is 48.5 pounds per acre of calcium nitrate, and that is weekly. But that's per acre, right? And so we don't have an acre. So 48.5 pounds per acre times our actual acreage equals just over a pound of calcium nitrate applied weekly to a high tunnel. So that is a tiny amount, totally doable, and just helps, give a low dose of fertility to your high tunnel on a weekly basis. If the entire high tunnel is planted with the same crop, you can also calculate based off the number of plants in a high tunnel. That's another way to look at it. So again, ID 36 has this information, 11.5 pounds of calcium nitrate per 1,000 tomato plants. This is based off 18-inch in-row spacing. So if your plants are considerably different than that, I would suggest adjusting your, this poundage a little bit. So 11.5 pounds per 1,000 plants, that equals 0.012 pounds per plant of calcium nitrate. And let's say you've got about 400 plants in your high tunnel. There you go, 4.8 pounds of calcium nitrate applied weekly. This is going to be, so this is also based off of about, I think, 5-foot centers. So if you've got 6 beds, you're probably on par. If you've got 8 beds in there, well, congratulations. I've never been able to get 8 beds in my high tunnel, but you will also need to adjust this number because you've got a lot more plants in a smaller space. And so just keep that in mind. So the takeaway message here is annual soil testing is recommended for vegetable crops. Test in the fall to prepare for the following spring. Look at and be sure to understand what the soil test is telling you. If you're not sure, ask. That's what that's part of our jobs, right? That's what we're here for. The guidance is only as good as the sample you collect. So make sure you collect a good sample, submit it appropriately, and your results will be reliable. You can also calculate how much of a particular fertilizer can be applied. You can get help on that, but you can also do it yourself. If you're going to rely on compost and manure, I highly recommend getting that tested. And I will put a link in the chat as well regarding foliar testing. That wasn't really the focus of today, but if you are keeping up with fruiting crops that do tend to have nutrient deficiencies and abiotic disorders, I highly recommend foliar testing throughout the season. Tomatoes, cucumbers, those kind of things are complicated. They are harder to grow in many cases. And so again, this is one of those, your results of your test, of your foliar test, are only as good as your sample. And so I'll put a link in the chat, kind of giving some instructions on that. And I see some stuff in the chat, but I'm not sure if it's for me. Oh, Chris is doing my job for me. I appreciate that. Yes, cool. So if there are any questions, I think I have a little bit of time for questions, or I can wait till the end. It's totally either way. I'm good. Or people can put it in the chat and I can answer as the Grow app people take over.
Yeah, folks, I want to take a pause here and make sure that anybody that wants to gets an opportunity to ask Rachel some questions. We're going to move on here in just a moment to more of the system side. Here are the units that you can use to fertigate. But for now, let's go ahead and see if there are any questions that have come up so far.
Well, if anything comes up, people can put it in the chat. That's great.
All right, good deal. Thank you, Rachel. All right, so we're going to move a little bit more onto the system side of things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the basic systems that are available for small plots. You know, we won't really get into the large scale systems that are compatible with, you know, large commercial farms, but you know, for high tunnels or small plots, these systems will work well for you and should be fairly user friendly. So go ahead and share my screen here. All right, I want to just make sure to get a thumbs up from my team, make sure that view is right. Everybody can hear me. I'll try to talk loud. Try not to talk too fast. All right, here we go. So these are some of the common fertigation systems that we use for high tunnels and small plots. And a lot of folks are now getting fertigation systems with their NRCS high tunnels as part of the drip irrigation kits. And so Kayla with Grow Appalachia has been doing a lot of installation of those. And so we want to make sure that folks know a little bit about these systems and how to use them and how they hook up to your drip irrigation. So, but first I want to make us think about a few considerations and how, in terms of how we evaluate these systems and how we make choices about what to get. So the first, you know, for a lot of us is cost. That's going to be important, but actually in a lot of ways, the smaller systems that I'm going to talk about are actually pretty comparable in terms of cost. But there are some caveats to that. Ease of use is a big one. So we want to make sure that the product that we're getting is user friendly and there's not potential for, you know, big major disasters, you know, us accidentally applying way more than we need or less than we need or something like that. So, and something that we can use efficiently, right? We don't want to have to get out there and fiddle with it every single day if we don't have to. So the durability and longevity of the system, of course, because we want that system to work for us for a long time and we don't want to have to be maintaining it as much. Compatibility with your system. So making sure that it's a system that works with drip irrigation or something similar, and making sure that it can, you know, the pressure's right, the flow is right, that you size the irrigation system appropriately. And that also goes down to capacity, which is, you know, how many acres or how many square feet can these systems serve, right? Because there's going to be some differences there in terms of small scale systems versus larger systems. And then of course the precision to which these things can deliver the product, right? Some crops, some production systems are going to need more precision. For most of us, precision is not as much of a concern. All right, so the two types that I want to talk about tonight, just real quickly, are the tank units. The biggest example there, of course, is the easy flow systems, which are widely available. That's what's being installed with NRCS high tunnels right now, and very user-friendly units. And then we've also got what's called a Venturi system. Now the Venturi is going to be a little bit more complicated, a little bit more technical, and we'll talk a little bit more about the differences. So with the Venturi, the Mazzy is going to be the most popular brand by far that I've seen. If you go to dripworks.com or Martin's Produce Supply or other places, this is the unit that you're going to find. And this is really just the basic component of the unit, and you actually build out the rest yourself. You can get custom built units to where you don't have to buy all of the rest of the components and attach them. You can just have it ready to plug and play. But this is what the overall system is going to look like for the Venturi or for the Mazzy units. So the pros here are that the Venturi are highly adjustable and customizable. So you see here, we've got a lot of knobs here that we can turn to help us incrementally adjust the flow rates and things like that. So it's pretty adjustable. They're very durable. You can see that this is just a single piece of plastic unit. There's not a lot of hoses or things that can go wrong with it. They're relatively inexpensive. They're scalable. So depending on the size that you get, you can do a small plot, or you can do, a couple acres if you need to with these. Now, some of the cons here is that they can be tricky to calibrate, right? So for the same reason that they're incrementally adjustable, you do have to play around with them and tweak the knobs and make sure that, before you're putting it onto your crop, that you know how much fertilizer is coming out of that. They're not as user-friendly for beginners just because of that, that factor. And you also have to appropriately size them. So, you need to know how many acres, you need to know what your flow rates are in order to be able to size these appropriately for your system. And in many cases, unless you're getting a pre-built system, you do have to buy the other components and get everything hooked up. So you got to know a little bit about plumbing and things like that too. The Berea College Farm uses these Venturi type units, and they're very effective, and they like them, but they can be a little bit tricky for especially beginners. So this is the other system, the Easy Flow. They already have a tank attached. That's one thing I forgot to mention with these Venturi units, is that you just you drop that into whatever tank that you already have. So you can have a big tank, so you can be pulling from a lot, whereas these have that kind of set size or scale. So they've got this knob on top that allows you to adjust the flow. It's not quite as incremental as the Mazzy, but it's really easy to adjust. You got slow, fast, and a couple settings in between. So it's pretty straightforward. We do recommend, if you can, to get the higher pressure tank if you're going to be installing this with a drip irrigation system. And those usually come with the brass fittings instead of the plastic fittings. So they're a little bit more durable, a little bit more long lasting. You don't have to depressurize the tank every time you're not using it. So it's a little bit more hands off, a little bit more just kind of durable and ready to use. You can see that unlike the Mazzy, where it's kind of one size fits all, you've got some little inserts here. You see these rings, and those help you size the unit to whatever scale that you're wanting to fertigate with, and so it is adjustable in that way as well. So these are the most user-friendly. They're easy to adjust. Relatively simple to use. They come with the tanks and all the parts, so it's ready to plug into the hose that leads to your drip irrigation system, and Kayla's going to talk about how that's all going to go. There's good instructions and there's great resources online to take you through step by step how to install and use them. The less expensive tanks with the thinner plastic are going to be about $80. But if you want that good that solid plastic tank with the brass fittings, that's going to be about $120. But that's typically what I recommend folks go with. There's more parts and pieces that can go wrong with that. So, you may need to order some of those replacement pieces from Easy Flow. It's not necessarily hard to do, but, when you have more moving parts and pieces, that can always lead to failures and repairs. So you do have that set tank capacity. So, if you want to, use a larger tank, you can't really do that with these systems. They're not quite as incrementally adjustable, and they're a little bit more susceptible to high pressure, especially if you don't get that rigid tank. So the tank that you see there on the right is going to be that thinner plastic tank, and that's the one that you're going to want to depressurize, and that's good to 50 psi. If you get that solid white hard plastic tank, that's good up to 80 psi. So just be aware of that. All right, so that's me. I'm going to turn it over to Kayla now, who's going to talk a little bit about how these systems get plugged into your drip irrigation and what to think about there.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Chris and Rachel. That was both good information. I know I definitely picked up on a couple of things there. So it's always good to reiterate the work that I do in a different perspective. So I'm going to share my screen here with you all, and my team could let me know it's good. You look good there? I hope that's a yes.
Go ahead, share your screen, Kayla.
Did I not share it already? My apologies. There we go. Okay, good now?
All right.
Perfect. All right, yeah, so the majority of the work that I do with irrigation and fertigation and fertilizers through water is doing the installation of them. So I'm the social enterprise manager of Grow, and what I do is manage the high tunnel enterprise. So that's building our high tunnels as well as selling tunnels and materials for tunnels, including water catchment and drip irrigation. With that work, I also do installations in affiliation with the NRCS and their system specifically. So I'm going to go through a couple of pictures here of two different systems that you all may be more interested in learning on, which is a system including from the water spigot and everything after that, from like a municipal or county, as well as a water catchment high tunnel water catchment system. So we sell all these products out of our high tunnel shop here in Berea, and I'm happy to share the information I have of other vendors in our area, and letting you all kind of know where to get these materials. So first off, like I said, we're going to be going through two different systems. One's coming from a hydrant, and the other one's coming from a pump out of your high tunnel. And so these differ. They're similar in a lot of ways. They're the common. There's lots of common components, but they're very different once you get into the field and start installing them, and then using them, especially the difference between the pump and the hydrant. So right here is what you would possibly see from a system. This system's out at the Berea Community Glades Garden here in Berea. And so here in Berea, we live in Madison County, and Madison County requires a vacuum breaker backflow preventer to be installed in order to irrigate your garden from drip tape and from your hydrant. And so this vacuum breaker does look a little scary. When I had to learn it for the first time several years ago, I did not understand what was going on, but it's very simple. It's very self-explanatory. It stops the flow from going back up into the municipal system by a vacuum pressure system within this little golden, I don't even know how to explain that. Yeah, it just kind of looks like a little golden pressure reducer or something like that. And so if you're looking over there to the left, we're going to go straight into the pressure reducer. Here with this specific system, she wanted a 4-way timer to go and do different zones in her garden. And so we actually had to put that timer at the bottom. Normally I would install the timer or recommend this timer to be installed at the very top, so you don't get a bunch of pressure built up in all of these different pieces in your system, which would then lead to leaking and other things like that. The other different types of backflow preventers, you may be familiar with a double check valve or a check valve. Those are a couple of others that I've installed in the past as well. This vacuum breaker specifically, it's the number one. It's the number one that most counties recommend or require because it is just the most precise, and it really stops anything from getting back into the system. But like I said, there's many different types. This one you actually have to install at least 12 inches from the top part of your garden. So if you're looking at your garden and the garden sits above where your spigot is, you're going to have to get a laser level or something out there like that to figure out that your vacuum breaker is sitting at least 12 inches above the highest part of your garden. That's the most important part about this vacuum breaker. So definitely check with your local water companies. And then after the pressure reducer there, which says 15 PSI on the side, that's what drip tape requires. Most drip tapes, we use a 15 mil drip tape. 10 to 15 PSI is where it likes to be before the end caps decide to shoot off. After that, you see the screen filter. That's just another filter to keep those larger sediments from getting back up into your municipal system or your water source. There is a lot of stuff that gets in there. When I clean these things out, when I go back to producer sites, I'm finding ants and see all sorts of stuff. So yeah, they do catch a lot. And then that goes to the timer, and then that's where you would put your fertigator. The fertigator always wants to be last, of course, because if you do have any sort of non-soluble sediments that come out of there, they'll get clogged up in the rest of these materials above. Here's a breakdown of all of these little pieces. I just wanted to kind of show you all what it looks like before it's put together, because I know it does look like it's all one piece or it's like a bunch of random pieces. It's not. It's all 3/4 inch pieces throughout the whole system. We are going to be sharing this PowerPoint, and so you all will have this list on your own after, but I'm also happy to share it in an Excel sheet or anything like that. Just let me know. This system roughly costs about $300 to $350, depending on where you're purchasing the products. Obviously, the vacuum breaker is quite expensive. They're about 90 to 100, and that timer there is about 75. So that's already about half of it. So I just want to kind of give you a rough estimate, and then Chris mentioned the pricing on the fertigators ahead of time. So like I said a little bit ago, the timer, ideally, you want it to be at the ahead of all the assembly, but it can go at the end if you don't, if you need to make different zones or anything like that, or if you're just irrigating one side of your garden that's in drip, and then the other side you may just want a garden hose or something like that out of soaker lines. There's many different purposes out of a spigot just in one area. So a one-way timer could go at the beginning of the assembly, but if you're going to do a 2 or a 4-way, it needs to be at the end. These timers, the brand is Orbit. That's the majority of what I've been installing, but there are different brands out there. These tend to have a life, if you leave it in the field, they have a life of about a year. So you really want to pull it out into your shed or something like that once you quit irrigating for the season, because they break and then it's broken. And so you have to go buy another one, and nobody wants to be wasting money on that. So, and then if you put it up every year, you can at least use it for 3 to 4 years. We just replaced these out at Glades, and they've had them for 4 years out there. So, and then the fertigator, yeah, that would be going at the end of the timer if you were to use a 4-way or 2-way timer. And then you just want to make sure that all of these junctions are very tight. If they need Teflon tape, making sure the Teflon tape is going the proper way. You do not need Teflon tape if there is a grommet or O-ring. You can reinforce if you think that the O-ring is a little bit bad or old. There's a couple of different ways you can go about fixing leaks in your system, but sometimes they just continue to subside, and you have to just deal with them. But like I said, I'm just trying to help you all figure out the best assembly line of all these pieces, because you do end up having to add a couple of extra nipples or adapters and things like that in order to get it all to work together. And then if you don't want to use a timer, you can always just zone off your drip irrigation lines by the red valve on the head of the drip tape line. So you don't necessarily need a timer. These things are just really great for people who don't live near their piece of plot that they're trying to irrigate, or just, don't want to walk down, or, just busy with the kids. There's many different reasons why people want to use timers. If you don't want to get up that early, you don't want to go down there. They're great for many different reasons, and they're relatively cheap for how efficient they are. So with this water catchment system, this is what it looks like when it's coming off of the high tunnel. That's what it looks like in the ground before we cover it up. This is what the NRCS requires, a 2-foot trench under your tank. So that's what that's going to look like. And then over there on the left side, that's just the standard gutter system. Those are the catchment screens. That's going to catch a lot of the big debris, which won't get into your system at all because it catches it there, and you can just clean it out from there. So here's a rundown of the materials on the water catchment system. It's pretty similar other than that big pump there. That pump is a sand filter pump. It's actually a pool pump that you would use for an out of ground pool. They run about $600. I think you can get them on Amazon for a bit cheaper. But you have to also buy the sand, which is about a 50-pound bag of sand. And then you got to have electric. That's the number one thing. It requires electric. And this is something that I think a lot of people get a little bit confused about, is that these water catchment systems do require electricity. So if you are in the process of getting a high tunnel and you are interested in water catchment, you need to think about electric. Just contact your USDA office if you aren't in the process yet and you are interested in a water catchment kit or drip irrigation kit or high tunnel kit. Those would be the guys to contact first. In here, it's kind of small, the picture, but at the bottom left of the screen, you can see the white hose going into a small brass. That is a check valve. That is a 3/4 inch check valve. That is another backflow preventer that I explained earlier. That one is no longer what the NRCS is requiring. They are actually requiring a 2-inch flap check valve. And so that would be it's going to look a little bit different from this picture. But like I said, I work with the NRCS a lot, and I know that has been recently changed. So just to throw that out there. And then after that, we've got our pressure reducer going then to the fertigator, which is the last in the line, which is the same as what we would do with the hydrant. And so that way you do not clog up all these smaller pieces, and they're not that expensive, $5 to $10 on the piece, but that's at the bottom of the priority list. When you go to Lowe's or Walmart, you forget about all those tiny little pieces that you need to keep this system going. All right, so I'm going to do a couple of small drip tape considerations and pro tips, and then I'm wrapping up and we can leave the floor for questions. So drip tape, I don't know how many of you all have used it, but it's actually genius. I think it's really cool stuff. The way that there's like a little zigzag wire and it only drips out every so many inches. The drip tape that we normally work with is 12-inch spacing, the emitter spacing, but it also comes in 6-inch emitter spacing, and anything pretty much you can find out there. There's also a different not textures, but gauges of that plastic. And so like a 15 mil is really thick. You can reuse that over the years with something skinnier, like a 5 or 6 mil. 6 mil is what we use on the outside of a high tunnel. So if you want to think about it like that, it's super thin plastic. It can rip pretty quickly or break, or bugs and varmints and all that stuff can get into that and tear it up pretty quickly. But if you do have a break in the line, you can use these little couplers here. That's the orange coupler. They come in black and all sorts of colors of the rainbow, but those are really easy fix. You can just chop your drip tape right in half and screw those in both sides. They're about 50 cents a piece, depending on where you get them. You always want to flush out your system when you do an initial install before you pop on those end caps. That's the blue end cap you see at the bottom right there. Just so all these emitters don't get clogged up. This drip tape gets clogged really easily, and you don't know where it's clogged, especially if you're putting plastic over your drip tape. And so that's another thing to think about is the drip tape going to go under or over your plastic, or using plastic at all? How are you going to figure out where the clogs are or where the breaks or rips are? And then if you're going to be using your fertigation system, you're definitely going to want to flush it out at the end of every application. So about once a week, if you are going to be following the guidelines that Dr. Rudolph just shared with us. And like I said, a standard cleaning out when you're installing it at the beginning of the year, flush it out. When you're ripping it up at the end of the year, you're going to want to flush it out if you're keeping it. If you're not keeping it, then no need to waste your time in water doing that. But like we talked about, there's insoluble and soluble different types of fertilizers. And so be super mindful of those when you are irrigating or attempting to use your fertilizer or fertigator for the first time. You can always contact us. We're always here for you, and we will answer as soon as we can. We are here for y'all. So I'm going to wrap up, and that's going to be the end of my presentation. So any questions for myself or Chris or Dr. Rudolph, feel free to share. Thank you all.
And folks, you can unmute and just ask your questions directly or type them in the chat if that's more comfortable for you.
I got a couple of questions.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Okay. For the fertilizer, I've got liquid fertilizer, and it's 10, 10, 10. And I imagine that a pint is a pound. So do I figure it out? Is that how you do that? Do you go ahead and assume that a pint is a pound fertilizer and work from there, figuring that if you've got a pint of fertilizer, that'd be 1.6 ounces. I'm not sure how that figures out on the application.
It should indicate on the package how much, usually it gives you some indication of how much is the equivalent. Do you have the original package?
Yeah, I do. I don't have it with me, but I do.
Yeah, so and you can follow up with one of us too, but usually it should give you, you know, that equivalent, like what you're saying, like a pint or a half of a cup or something. It should tell you.
Okay. I was thinking like, I tried to kind of figure it out as we went, but with a 32 with 70, I'm fertilizing 7 things. It looked like it's going to take about a cup and a half a week. Does that sound?
That doesn't sound unreasonable, but yeah, I would bet if you can, if you want to put the brand in the chat, I can look it up and see if I can find the label.
I don't even know what it is. I'll have to
Okay.
go look at it. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, I'm guessing the label, like on the back side of the package, it has a an equivalent like what you're saying, and that would give us how much you would need to apply a week. Yeah.
Okay, Kayla, you said you had to flush out those lines. I know mine, some of them I get wet and some of them don't. Is that just take the end off and turn the water on? Simply do that?
Exactly.
Okay. How
Yep.
long does it take? Just a little bit?
Yeah, you shouldn't have to flush them out more than 1 to 2 minutes. And if
Okay.
you feel like you've been really pushing it on not cleaning them
Well, I
out,
haven't,
you
but
just run it.
I've used those lines for 3 years now. And I can see on some of them, it's not coming out. So,
Right.
okay,
Some of them may just need to be replaced if you're finding that they're just way too clogged up.
yeah. You ever coming our way anytime soon? If you are, bring me a row.
Yes, one of us will be out there with Chris and Story running out there for production plans and myself doing high tunnel installs. I bet, definitely.
Coming out
Oh.
June 16th, Frank, to Letcher County. So we'll connect then.
Nope, you muted Frank.
I have a question. Can I take the check valve that I have in my high tunnel that hooks up to my water tanks and use that in my municipal line as a backflow preventer, or do I need to get that product that Mark showed as a vacuum breaker?
I would recommend you check with your water company.
Okay.
I'm not a certified plumber. I'm not allowed to tell you that.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think a check valve is similar, but not the same as an actual backflow preventer. So I think you need to get an actual backflow preventer. They're very similar, but it's not quite as effective as a as a backflow preventer or the vacuum breaker. It's same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so the check valve does swing closed when water's trying to come back up into the system, but there's the potential for some water to get past that gate because it's just that one step, right? Whereas a vacuum breaker actually creates a break there between the 2 water columns, so you never have any. You have a better form of control there.
Yeah, an air gap.
An air gap, yeah, exactly. And most municipal systems, and this is why the NRCS kind of started changing up their rules and their systems, want you to have that something that's considered a backflow preventer, like that vacuum breaker.
I think that vacuum breaker, it was about $80, I believe, somewhere around there. Frank, if you'll send us a picture of that fertilizer, we can make sure to get you some good information on it. All right, who else has got some questions for us? Rachel, I have a question for you if nobody else is going to jump in. You talked about adjusting pH as early in the fall in the late fall. Is there any special techniques that you have to use applying that in the high tunnel to affect pH change? I'm just wondering about it not having access to overhead water if there's a particular method that folks use.
That's interesting. I would say if you could irrigate a bit before you take out the drip tape, right, then apply your lime or your sulfur, whichever one. You do need some soil moisture. But I would say if you irrigated a little bit beforehand, that would probably be enough to then, you want to incorporate it. And then, if you were worried about it, you could then, apply, put your drip tape back in, right? You could do that. That's an option. Or wait until, you're about to plant, like in February, and just install it early and get a little bit more moisture in there. But that's a good point. You do need some soil moisture in there. So don't let your high tunnel soil dry out completely before you apply your sulfur or your lime. It does require some, yeah.
Thank you.
Or you could do a sprinkler, get
Yeah.
a sprinkler in there. Yeah.
It'd probably be good for the tunnel if it's not in production to have that a little bit of extra water just to.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, do folks have any other questions? I think Chris may have a poll for you folks that stuck around with us. Is that true, Chris?
That is true. I'm going to go ahead and launch it here real quick. Oh, it says I'm logged in from another device. Your polling session is inactive. So, all right, another little Zoom curveball. This has been 2 years of learning with this platform, and still apparently don't know all there is to know. So that's all right.
Well,
If this was helpful, give me a thumbs up. All right. Do a little informal poll there. Okay. Well, I'll be emailing you all to get your feedback as well, and to make sure that you all get the resources that we dropped in the chat. I'm going to make sure you get everybody's PowerPoint slides, and that you get a recording of the workshop too, if you ever want to go back and look at those things. We'll be posting this on YouTube. So we had a lot of folks sign up tonight, but not many folks here. So probably a lot of folks are going to be counting on this to watch later on YouTube. So for those of you who did show up tonight, thanks for taking time out of your production season. I know it's a busy time of year for you all, and hopefully we were able to provide some good information. And I'll see you all out in the field. Thanks for coming tonight.